where winter claims its own. The wind cut through the Wyoming territory like a blade forged in hell's own smithy, carrying with it the promise of a winter that would test every soul brave enough or foolish enough to call this God-forsaken stretch of prairie home. Jonas Whitmore pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he made his way across the frozen ground, his boots crunching through the snow that had fallen steadily for 3 days now. It was December, and the cold had teeth. He'd been checking the fence line on the north pasture when he saw her, a small figure huddled against the old cottonwood tree that stood like a sentinel at the edge of his property. The same tree where just 8 months prior his wife Martha had drawn her last breath. Her hand clutched in his as consumption finally claimed what the harsh frontier had been trying to take for years. Jonas stopped in his tracks, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. For a moment, in the swirling snow and fading light, he thought he was seeing Martha's ghost, but as he drew closer, squinting through the gray twilight, he realized it was a child, a girl, couldn't be more than 12 or 13, curled up against the base of the tree with her arms wrapped around her knees. She wasn't moving. His first instinct was to call out, to rush forward and scoop her up, carry her to the warmth of his cabin where a fire still burned in the hearth. But something held him back, a memory of Martha's voice, soft and weak in those final days, telling him about the importance of being still, of listening, of understanding before acting. Sometimes, she had whispered, her fingers tracing patterns on the quilt her mother had made, the kindest thing you can do for someone is just to be present with them, not to fix or save or change anything, just to be there. So Jonas did something that surprised even himself. He sat down in the snow, his back against the rough bark of the cottonwood, about 6 feet from where the girl lay motionless. He pulled off his heavy wool coat and set it beside him, then settled in to wait. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. The snow continued to fall, dusting his shoulders and gathering in the brim of his hat. Jonas studied the girl's face, what he could see of it beneath the tangle of dark hair that had escaped from her thin shawl. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as milk glass, but he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. Still alive then, still fighting. He thought about Martha, about how she used to sit beneath this very tree on summer evenings, mending clothes, or reading one of the books she'd brought from back east. She'd always said the cottonwood had good energy, that it was a place where troubled souls could find peace. Jonas had never put much stock in such notions. He was a practical man, a farmer who dealt in soil and seed and the honest sweat of his brow. But sitting here now, in the place where his wife had chosen to spend her final moments above ground, he began to understand what she'd meant. The girl stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown like coffee beans, set in a face that spoke of hardship beyond her years. She looked at Jonas with a mixture of fear and resignation, as if she'd grown accustomed to disappointment. "You ain't gonna hurt me, are you, mister?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, cracked with cold and something that might have been hope. Jonas shook his head slowly. "No, child, I'm not gonna hurt you." She studied his face for a long moment, taking in the weathered features, the kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow, the careful way he held himself present but not threatening. "Then why ain't you telling me to move along? Most folks would." "Most folks ain't buried their wife beneath this tree," Jonas said quietly. The girl's eyes widened slightly. She looked around, seeming to notice for the first time the small wooden cross that marked Martha's grave, half hidden now by the accumulating snow. "Oh," she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I can go somewhere else." "Where would you go?" Jonas asked gently. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. The girl's face crumpled slightly, and Jonas saw the weight of whatever had brought her to this place, to this moment when freezing to death under a stranger's tree seemed like a reasonable option. "Nowhere, I reckon," she admitted, her voice small and lost. Jonas nodded, understanding flooding through him like warm honey. He'd felt that same emptiness after Martha passed, the sense that there was nowhere in the world that felt like home anymore, nowhere that made sense without her laughter echoing through the rooms. "My name's Jonas," he said. "Jonas Whitmore. This is my land, my tree." He paused, then added, "My wife's resting place. I'm Lucy," the girl replied. "Lucy Brennan. At least that's what they called me at the orphanage before I ran off." "Where's the orphanage?" "Cheyenne. About 30 miles south, I reckon. Walked most of the way, caught a ride on a freight wagon for the last bit." She shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Matron there said they were going to send me to work for some family in California. Said I was old enough to earn my keep now. But I heard tell of what kind of work they have planned for girls like me, and I figured freezing to death might be preferable." Jonas felt a cold anger settle in his chest, not at the girl, but at a world that would drive a child to such desperate measures. He thought of Martha, who had never been able to carry a child to term despite their years of trying, who had spoken often of how much love she had to give if only God would bless them with someone to receive it. "Lucy," he said carefully, "how long since you've had a proper meal?" She considered the question as if it were a complex mathematical equation.
3 days, maybe 4. Had some stale bread I found behind the bakery in town, but that's about it. Jonas stood slowly, brushing the snow from his pants. He picked up his coat and held it out to her. Come on then, let's get you somewhere warm. Lucy looked at the offered coat with suspicion. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. My wife used to say that sometimes we're put in each other's path for reasons we don't understand right away, Jonas replied. And she was usually right about such things. The girl hesitated for another moment, then reached out and took the coat. It engulfed her small frame like a tent, but Jonas could see the relief in her eyes as the warmth began to seep into her bones. They walked to the cabin in comfortable silence, their footsteps muffled by the snow. Jonas opened the door and gestured for Lucy to enter first, then followed her into the warm glow of the main room. The cabin was simple but well built. Jonas had constructed it himself in the early days of his marriage, when he and Martha had still believed they had decades ahead of them to fill it with children and laughter. Sit by the fire, Jonas instructed, pointing to one of the 2 chairs that flanked the stone hearth. I'll fix you something to eat. As he moved around the small kitchen area, preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork, Jonas found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. Lucy sat perfectly still in the chair, her hands extended toward the flames, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. There was something about her stillness that reminded him of Martha, not in appearance, for Martha had been fair and blonde where Lucy was dark, but in the way she seemed to take in everything around her with quiet observation. This is a nice place, Lucy said softly. Feels like a home. It was, Jonas replied, stirring the pot on the stove. My wife, she had a way of making any place feel like home. Always said it wasn't the building that mattered, but the love inside it. What was she like? Jonas paused in his stirring, considering how to capture Martha's essence in words. She was kind, patient, had more faith in people than they probably deserved. Used to take in stray animals, cats, dogs, even a raccoon once. Drove me half crazy, but I loved her for it. She sounds wonderful. She was. Jonas ladled the hot beans into a bowl and brought it to Lucy, along with a chunk of bread and a cup of hot coffee. Eat slowly now. Don't want to make yourself sick. Lucy took the bowl with reverent hands, as if she were receiving communion. She ate carefully, savoring each bite, and Jonas felt a tightness in his throat as he watched her. When was the last time someone had shown this girl such basic kindness? Mr. Whitmore, Lucy said between bites. What happened to your wife, if you don't mind me asking? Jonas settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own cup of coffee. Consumption. Started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then got worse over time. Doctor in town said there wasn't much to be done but keep her comfortable. He stared into the fire, remembering. She wanted to spend her last day outside, said she didn't want to die indoors like some caged bird. So I carried her out to that cottonwood tree, set up some blankets, and we just sat there together until the end. I'm sorry, Lucy said, and there was such genuine compassion in her young voice that Jonas felt tears prick at his eyes. Thank you, that means something, coming from you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind whistling around the cabin's eaves. Finally, Lucy set down her empty bowl and looked at Jonas with serious eyes. I can't stay, she said. I appreciate the meal and the warmth, but I can't burden you. You've got your own grief to carry. Jonas leaned forward in his chair. Where will you go? I don't know. Maybe I can find work somewhere. Or, you're 13 years old, Jonas interrupted gently. In the middle of winter. In Wyoming territory. You know as well as I do what your options are. Lucy's face flushed, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I'd rather die free than live as someone's property. There was steel in her voice, a strength that reminded Jonas of Martha's quiet determination. His wife had possessed that same fierce independence, that refusal to be diminished by circumstances beyond her control. What if there was another option? Jonas asked quietly. Lucy's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of option? Jonas took a deep breath, hardly believing what he was about to propose. I need help around here. The farm's too much for one man, especially with winter coming on hard. I can offer you room and board, fair wages, and the respect every person deserves. Nothing more, nothing less. Why? Lucy asked suspiciously. What's in it for you? Jonas considered the question. Why was he making this offer? Was it guilt over Martha's death? A desperate attempt to fill the void she'd left behind? Was it simple human decency? The recognition that this child needed help and he was in a position to provide it? Or was it something else? A sense that Martha herself had somehow guided Lucy to that tree, to the place where she'd chosen to let go of this world. My wife and I, we always wanted children, he said finally. Never worked out that way. Maybe this is God's way of answering a prayer I thought had gone unheard. Lucy studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or hidden motives. Jonas sat still under her scrutiny, letting her see him clearly, the grief-worn farmer who had nothing left to lose and maybe something left to give. I don't know much about farming, she said at last. I can teach you. I've got a temper sometimes. The matron at the orphanage said I was too headstrong for my own good. So did my wife. Seemed to work out fine for her. A small smile tugged at the corner of Lucy's mouth, the first Jonas had seen from her. "I don't know how to be part of a family. Never really had one. Neither do I anymore," Jonas admitted. "Maybe we can figure it out together." The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows, and reminding them both of the harsh world waiting just beyond the walls. But inside, the fire burned warm and steady, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls and illuminating the careful hope growing between a broken man and a lost girl. "All right," Lucy said quietly. "I'll stay, at least until spring." Jonas nodded, not trusting his voice. He stood and moved to the window, looking out through the frost-etched glass toward the cottonwood tree where Martha rested. The snow had stopped falling, and for just a moment he could swear he saw a figure standing beneath the branches, a woman in a white dress, her hand raised in blessing or farewell. When he blinked, she was gone, leaving only the tree standing sentinel in the moonlight. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, whether to Martha or to God or to the mysterious forces that had brought this child to his door. He wasn't sure. Maybe it didn't matter. Behind him, Lucy had curled up in the chair by the fire, Jonas's coat still wrapped around her like a blanket. Her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep, and her face had lost some of its guarded wariness. She looked young again, vulnerable in the way children should be allowed to be. Jonas banked the fire and spread a quilt over her, then settled into the other chair to keep watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, neighbors who would question his decision, legal complications regarding Lucy's status, the practical difficulties of two wounded souls learning to share a space. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. As the hours passed and the fire burned low, Jonas found himself thinking about the strange paths that grief could take. He'd expected to spend the rest of his days alone, tending his farm and carrying Martha's memory like a stone in his chest. Instead, he'd found purpose in an unexpected place, not in replacing what he'd lost, but in offering shelter to someone who needed it as much as he did. Maybe that was how healing worked. Not through forgetting or moving on, but through finding new ways to love, new reasons to hope. Maybe Martha had known that when she chose to spend her final moments beneath the cottonwood tree, in the place where lost souls could find their way home. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin, two unlikely companions slept peacefully, warmed by fire and the fragile promise of tomorrow. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the frosted windows, the spirit of a woman who had understood the power of love smiled and whispered her blessing on this new beginning. Spring would come, as it always did, and when it arrived it would find them ready, a farmer and his adopted daughter, bound not by blood but by choice, by circumstance, and by the enduring belief that even the most broken hearts could learn to beat in harmony again. But that was a story for another day. Tonight it was enough to have found each other in the darkness, two souls who had wandered far from home, discovering that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the simple act of sitting still, of being present, of choosing to stay when everything else tells you to run. In the dying embers of the fire, Jonas thought he heard Martha's laughter, soft and approving, carried on the wind that rattled the windows and promised snow by morning. He closed his eyes and smiled, finally understanding what she had tried to tell him in those final days beneath the cottonwood tree. Love doesn't end with death, it just finds new ways to grow, and in a cabin on the Wyoming frontier it was already taking root again, tender and strong, reaching toward the light of a new dawn.